This single DIN radio doesn't have a face on it. What's going on there? That's because it's one of these giant touchscreen radios, and you will never believe who manufactures this radio. Get ready to be surprised. If you go on Amazon right now and do a search for floating screen car stereos, you'll find a massive list comprised almost entirely of brands you've never heard of at prices that are unbelievable. You're going to be tempted to grab one of these with a big floating screen plus wireless CarPlay and Android Auto for sometimes as low as $200, especially when the name brand units start at $1,000 and then they go up from there. But every one of these generic head units that I've tested has had a major problem. And I'll be the first to admit that I've not tested anywhere near all of them. But when you test 3 or 4 in a row and they're all a hot mess, why do you need to keep testing? And when I say hot mess, I literally mean a smoking hot mess. I had one of these things let out a big puff of smoke on startup. One of the components on one of the daughter boards shorted out. I tested another brand that had some really cool and unique features, and after I uploaded the video, I started getting some really bad feedback. These units would only last about a month before they started to fail. And I know what you're thinking, you see these things all over YouTube. Well, there's a reason for that. The marketing department for these brands, they just spam the ever-living hell out of anybody with a social media following. I get multiple offers a month, and I just ignore them. But then I got an email that was a little bit different. I may have found the best bargain 10-inch head unit on the market. Let's find out. The radio comes with everything you need, the big giant 10-inch touchscreen, the unit itself. It's got an XM antenna. This little pigtail right here is for steering wheel controls, a microphone for the Bluetooth and Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, which I believe is wireless. We'll find out in a bit. Good old-fashioned single DIN cage, total old school, and mounting brackets in case you need them. I don't think we're going to need them. I built a little mount right over here that I'm going to mount it in. It should cage mount in without any trouble. This is the wiring harness. I've already got it hooked up to some terminals here, and this is interesting. This looks like it came with some type of noise suppression on it. When you crack that open, there's a big coil of wire in here. I've seen noise suppressors on the power wires before, but never anything big like that. It even came with this bag, and this bag has some bright orange pry tools. Pry tools are always handy. It was upside down, so I had to take it out and put it back in. We're gonna get a nice pop here. Now the big front goes on the front. These two little pieces right here line up to these pieces here, and we'll just snap her right in, and then we can lift it up as needed. It can adjust right, left, and now it's time for the big reveal. It's a Boss. This is a Boss Elite 10-inch touchscreen. And right now, a bunch of you just went down to the comments to start trashing the brand. So stop typing, watch the rest of the video. This thing might just surprise you. I'm going to do some testing later on in the video. You don't want to miss that. But for now, we're going to go over some of the quirks and features. The first and most important feature besides the giant 10-inch display is Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, and yes, it is the wireless version of both. As soon as the phone connection was established, all of the maps and music and everything popped up on this big, bright screen. The colors on the screen are really nice. The footage I have does not do it justice. As for the audio controls, it has a 13-band equalizer with several presets, and of course, controls for faders and balance plus crossovers. The crossover settings were not exactly intuitive. There's a subwoofer crossover that's pretty straightforward, just your standard low pass filter for the 2 subwoofer channels. Then there are 2 controls for the main audio channels, a high pass, which seems to make sense. You'll use that to keep the low frequencies out of your mids and highs. Then it has a low pass filter that I just can't quite figure out what it's for. I probably should have read the manual to figure that out, but who reads manuals? That filter is adjustable between 2000 hertz and 20,000 hertz, so it's like a bandpass filter if you want to install some mid-range speakers. Almost like it should have a 3-way mode, but I couldn't find a high-pass filter for some tweeters, so I'm not sure what to make of that. The head unit also has time alignment. Every other time alignment I've ever used, you could use some measure of distance like inches or centimeters, and the head unit would then calculate the delay for you. You'll have to do that math on your own because this delay is in milliseconds only. The unit unit has LED backlighting, and you can change the color and the brightness of that backlighting. You've got 2 camera inputs and multiple ways to control your cameras. First, you've got your standard reverse trigger. This is for your rear backup camera. You typically wire that to your tail lights, and when you put the vehicle in reverse, it will turn on your backup camera. Then it has 2 12-volt outputs that you can use to turn on that rear camera or turn on a front camera. That's kind of handy because then you can check those camera views anytime that you like. You just tap on the home screen to turn those cameras on or off. So right now what I have done is I have put a 12-volt signal to the reverse trigger, and the reverse trigger turns on just like it normally would. You've got your parking assist lines on the screen, and you can see the LED lights on the camera are on. Video quality is typical for a backup camera, and it will depend on the camera that you're using. Now I'm going to switch up the connections. I'm going to connect this camera to the 12-volt camera output. You can just hit this camera button down at the bottom of the screen and the camera turns on. Oh, and hey, did you notice it's got an actual physical volume knob plus several physical buttons? If you like a head unit with a volume knob, let me know by hitting the like button. And of course, there's camera controls on the home screen. I don't have a front camera connected, so the front camera is shaded out. Checking out the steering wheel control settings, you've got 2 options. The first is fixed settings, and this is designed for use with a PAC or Metra interface. It says that right on the screen. But it also has a learning mode, and you can see here that in learning mode you can use your steering wheel controls to turn on the camera. That's all great, but if you don't have clean audio output, this thing's worthless. So I'm going to measure the preamp voltage by connecting an oscilloscope to the RCAs and playing a 1000 Hz test tone. The test tone's on a USB stick, so I'm using the rear USB input. The idea here is to turn up the volume until we get clipping. As you can see, the radio is all the way up to full volume, 50 out of 50, with no clipping. If we zoom in a bit, you can see that you get 4.19 volts. So this thing has a legit and clean 4-volt preamp output. The numbers don't lie. Just to make sure it wasn't a fluke, I went ahead and tested all 4 channels. Going to put them up on the screen right now. And I know down in the comments, somebody already jumped in and started hating on Boss. Well, you have to eat crow now because this thing is clean. Why don't we go ahead and play a 40 Hertz tone and test the subwoofer output. To test the subwoofer output, I've got the crossover on AP for all pass and the subwoofer level all the way up. So we'll go back to our USB stick, and this time we're looking for the 40 Hertz test tone. 40 Hertz 0 dB test tone, there we go. We'll turn on the scope, put it in oscilloscope mode. We press play and start turning it up. And we start to have soft clipping at 49 out of 50. Definitely hard clipping at 50 out of 50. But right over here, we had the sub-level all the way up. So let's turn that sub-level down, and at sub-level 10, everything smooths out, and we have 3.72 volts out. So with the subwoofer all the way up, we do get clipping. The tops begin to level off at 13. That gives us 4.25 volts. And if we go up to 14, we get 4.39 volts. That's not as good, but it's acceptable. If you run a clip signal into a Class D subwoofer amplifier, it will come out clean on the other side. If you don't believe me, let me know and I'll make a video and see if I can prove it to you. Who knows, I might be wrong. This Boss unit is looking pretty good. You get a 10-inch touchscreen, wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, dual camera inputs, a USB input, an AV input, plus there's another USB-C connector on the side of the unit. Throw in some clean preamp outputs and there's really no reason not to buy one of these. But it's probably too soon to say that because everybody knows what the real problem is with Boss Audio. Whoever it is who runs the place apparently has no idea how to calculate a watt. It says 340 watts on the owner's manual front, and that can't possibly be right. It's only got a 15 amp fuse. I looked up specs online. I'll give you a link to the specs right down below. The specs I found said 20 watts per channel. It's got enough fusing, so it might legit be able to do those kind of numbers. So what I'm gonna do is see if I can find where I left my DD1, and if I can find it, we'll just test it and see how much power it makes. All right, here is the setup. I got wires going everywhere, so it's kind of wild. I've got the distortion detector hooked up. I've got the AMM1 hooked up. I've got a resistor bank over here. And I got some 9-wire running to the back of the stereo connected to the speaker outputs, and each of those is on their own 4-ohm resistor. So I'm going to load all 4 channels. Press play. There we go. We're detecting a signal, not showing any watts yet. I am getting a strong hum now from the head unit. Distortion at 14 watts. And she tops out at 14 watts. You may have noticed this. I'll rewind it and show it to you. The distortion light on the DD1 turned on at 45 out of 50, and then it turned off as I cranked it up. I'm not sure what to make of that. The light on the DD1 will sometimes flash, but at full volume it wasn't showing distortion and the AMM wasn't showing clipping. So even though it only put out 14 watts, it was 14 clean watts. But the specs online say 20 watts, which is exactly the problem with the Boss Audio. 14 watts is pretty standard for a head unit, and I think this is a great head unit. It's going to find a permanent home over on my test bench. Let's see how it sounds. It sounded just fine to me. The bass was a little bit weak because I had the high pass filter turned on. In the floating screen head unit market, there are two extremes. On one end, you have inexpensive, no-name head units from Amazon. These things pack on the features and oftentimes include features that people don't really need or use. And I'm sure some of them are great, but a lot of them are not, so buyer beware. On the other end, you have the traditional brands, which also pack on features that most people aren't going to use. And of course, they pack on the price. I'm sure there are plenty of people who don't mind paying $1,000 for a head unit, but those numbers price a lot of people out of the market. The Boss Elite lands right in the middle. It does this by trimming back some features like an HDMI input, but it has all the big ones that most people are looking for. Wireless Android Auto, wireless CarPlay, and clean preamp outputs. Boss landed right in the sweet spot in this market, and I suspect they're going to sell a ton of these head units. If you enjoyed the video, right up here is another one for you to watch. Before I go, I need to say thank you to all of my patrons, with a bonus shout out to $25 and up patrons Jonathan, Joaquin, JD America, Timothy, and Bo. I'm Justin, this is the DIY Audio Guy YouTube channel, and I will see you on the next adventure.